Chane, bound by shadow, is one of the most iconic and polarizing characters in Flesh and Blood. Depending on who you ask, he's remembered as the boogeyman of certain metagames or as one of the most underrated and skill-intensive heroes ever printed. Love him or hate him, he has made his mark on the game as one of the first heroes to achieve Living Legend status, ending his legality in the classic constructed format. This is the story of Chane's journey to Living Legend. Before we go any further, I just want to say that this video was a huge effort and took a ton of time to put together. The best way to show that you enjoyed it and want to see more of this type of content is to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below with which hero you want to see covered next. Okay, let's get into it. First off, we need to know exactly what Living Legend means. The Living Legend system is Flesh and Blood's version of card rotation. As stated by the game's creator, James White, the purpose of the Living Legend system is to recognize sustained excellence of heroes and elegantly evolve the metagame over time. How LSS has aimed to achieve this has undergone a decent amount of alterations since its inception. Apparently, there was an original vision for heroes to obtain Living Legend status by making top 8 at the World Championship. This was never implemented, and instead the first official system had heroes achieving Living Legend after winning 10 professional level events, which at the time included callings, national championships, and world championships. This was relatively short-lived, as it was overhauled in July of 2021. Now, heroes accrue different amounts of Living Legend points based on the caliber of the events the hero wins, and rotates out of Classic Constructed when they hit 1,000 points. As the game has grown, the points awarded for certain events has been tweaked, with the last change to the system being on September 9th, 2022. This is the current system as of the release of this video. It's very possible we will continue to see more adjustments to the Living Legend system as the game evolves. Chane was first revealed on April 16th during the spoiler season for Flesh and Blood's upcoming 4th set, Monarch. In the article entitled Power at Any Cost, James White outlined the Shadow Runeblade's design philosophy and general play pattern. The article came with a not-so-subtle warning that Chane was intended to be a competitive powerhouse. For those unfamiliar with Chane, here's a quick rundown of how he works. Once per turn, Chane's hero ability creates a Soul Shackle token and gives his next Runeblade or Shadow action go again. Soul Shackles stack throughout the game, and they each banish a card from the top of Chane's deck at the start of the turn. And of course, Chane's unique card pool is all about being able to play cards from the banished zone. These cards come with the caveat of Blood Debt, which deals 1 damage to Chane if they are left in the banished zone at the end of the turn. Looking back, it's hard to say what the community's initial impressions of Chane were. The game was still young, there were fewer content creators, and no online client to rapidly test new cards. All there was to go on was a new card pool, a few early testing reports, and a warning from the game's creator. Chane's debut in Classic Constructed came on the Sunday ProQuest event at the Calling Auckland on June 6th, where he represented 20% of the meta and 5 of the top 8 decks. It was clear that players were excited to try out the new hero and found success with their untested builds. One of these builds, in the hands of Dan McKay, was able to make it to the finals.
Hello and welcome, this is the ProQuest final Classic Constructed, where we have got the old school versus the new school. It is Chane versus Katsu.
While ultimately losing the finals, the event provided a sneak peek into the meta Flesh and Blood was about to enter. The rest of the world got their first taste of Chane in Premier Play in the 2021 Road to Nationals season. 175 events ran from July 31st to September 5th, 2021 in 25 countries across North America, Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. And oh boy, did Chane make quite the first impression. The first week of Road to Nationals events saw Chane making the highest number of top 8s at 35, but tied for the second most wins, taking down 3 events, trailing behind Katsu at 5 wins. As the season continued, more players picked up Chane and saw increasingly positive results.
Everyone kind of knows that Chane's been pretty dominant this season. It was a slower start, but really from week 2 to 6, like Chane has been the dominant deck.
It's crazy. A 16% conversion percentage. So 16% of the time, if you go into the top 8 as Chane, you might win.
After 6 weeks of ripping through the competition, Chane had won a total of 67 events, over 1/3 of all RTNs, earning him 402 Living Legend points, skyrocketing him far above all other heroes on the Living Legend leaderboard. Chane decks at this time were considered aggressive decks, but also had the flexibility of using cards to block when they needed to. The goal was to build up card advantage via Soul Shackles and end the game with a huge turn where multiple Seeds of Agony fueled a massive Rift Bind.
That'd be a huge Rift Bind.
This is the big turnaround turn where Chane starts to really put his foot down to the pedal to the metal. The Rift Bind itself is getting pumped by 4 different non-attack action cards here.
Huge Rift Bind.
Block there and just
that
say
is-
GG.
that
There's
is
just
game.
no way.
The deck's greatest weakness was itself, as Chane ripped through cards faster than any hero. It just had to get the job done before running out of cards or dying to blood debt. With the limited card pool, Chane builds almost all consisted of the same core 60 cards. They ran the most efficient blood deck cards to play from the banished zone, like Riftbind, Seeds of Agony, and Bounding Demigon, and the most powerful Shadow and generic cards like Art of War, Plunder Run, and Shadow Puppetry, to enable increasingly wide turns as the game went on. Partway through the season, some Chane decks saw the inclusion of Flock of the Featherwalkers to shift the deck from being a full-on aggressive deck to more of a combo deck.
So Flock is excellent at that game plan. Attack would go again and then finish the end of your chain with a flock of the Featherwalkers, making a quicken token, revealing a card to put in your arsenal, and then next turn you effectively have a 5-card hand because you're not going to block, plus a quicken token.
This helped the deck into the mirror and matchups that were only aiming to block. Chane's equipment suite is also what made him so unbeatable. Carrion Husk, Grasp of the Arknight, and Arcanite Skullcap represented potentially 12 damage blocked throughout a game. This allowed Chane to prevent his opponents from taking tempo at least once and maintain the cards and life total he needed to carry out his game plan. The strategy to combat Chane consisted of racing him or blocking everything until he ran out of cards. Anything in between just did not work. No other hero could consistently beat Chane in a race.
This is lethal! This is a turn 3 kill in Classic Constructed.
And heroes like Bravo, Prism, Dash, and Katsu, who did their best to block the entire game, saw less than stellar results. Snag and Chains of Eminence were specific tech cards that players started using against Chane to mitigate the power of a massive Riftbind in the endgame. But hindsight has shown that at least Snag didn't end up being as successful as players had hoped. At the end of the day, these cards were a potential liability in a lot of decks, and Chane could usually find a way to play around them, as was evident by his summer of domination. Fresh off the Road to Nationals season came the Calling Las Vegas on September 11th and 12th. Chane represented 22% of all decks at the event, and had an amazing win rate across 7 rounds to represent 45% of the decks at the start of day 2. After 11 total rounds, the top 8 consisted of 1 Dash, 2 Prisms, and 5 Chains. Despite the odds being in Chane's favor, the event was taken down by Tyler Horsepool's Control Prism deck, which was well prepared for the Chane matchup.
Those 2 attacks plus the blood debt damage is gonna end the game. It's over. Tyler picks up the win at the Calling Las Vegas.
While he didn't earn any Living Legend points, the Calling Las Vegas reaffirmed what we saw in the previous RTN season. Chane was indeed the current boogeyman, and the meta was going to continue to form around him. In light of Chane's performance, it became clear that action had to be taken by LSS. At the next Banned and Suspended announcement on September 21st, Seeds of Agony was banned in Classic Constructed. As I mentioned earlier, Seeds was a core component of all Chane decks, with most builds running the full 9 copies, so this ban was a significant nerf. Public opinion on Chane without Seeds was generally pretty poor.
And for me, Seeds really feels like the jugular. Like, it doesn't really get much worse than banning Seeds of Agony.
Without Seeds of Agony, I think Chane's going to be knocked down quite a bit.
I think he is down to tier B.
There's a lot of Chane players out there, so Chane players will misuse Seeds, and they'll have to rebuild from there.
But in its current iteration, obviously that deck is trashed.
Definitely not going to be as good.
I think that we'll see a heavy shift off of Chane.
Producing enough damage to kill the opponent before banishing the entire deck now sounded like a tall order. Many wrote the deck off as unplayable and moved on. Some persevered and went back to the drawing board. As a side note, Duskblade, a Runeblade weapon that had yet to be released, was also proactively banned in this announcement. I'll skip over the details, but it was obvious that this card was incredibly overtuned. There was a moment where we all thought the most powerful hero was being gifted the most powerful weapon ever printed. One of the few design mistakes that LSS has elegantly apologized for. Tales of Aria First Edition released on September 24th, 2021, with Unlimited falling on October 12th. This booster draft set introduced 3 new heroes into the CC meta, Oldhim, Lexi, and Briar. With the inclusion of Briar, the elemental Runeblade, this set provided some new tools to Chane, mainly in the form of spellbound creepers and the new elemental Runeblade weapon, Rosetta Thorn. As soon as it was revealed, it was a no-brainer that Chane would be running Rosetta Thorn from now on. All other Runeblade weapons simply paled in comparison to the raw value that came from consistently attacking for 2 arcane and 2 physical damage off of 1 resource. With a round of bans and a new set released, a fresh metagame was on the horizon for the follow-up to the Road to National season, the 2021 National Championships. Starting in late October, 25 countries hosted tournaments to crown their own Flesh and Blood national champions. Right before the season kicked off, word spread quickly that Briar, not Chane, could be the new deck to beat, thanks to impressive results of early builds at the Cincinnati ProQuest. By the USA National Championship on November 5th through 7th, the largest of the season by far, Briar had become well established as the new boogeyman, dethroning Chane as the premier aggro deck of the format, thanks in part to her victory the week prior in the UK. However, at only 6% of all decks registered, Chane players fought their way through 10 rounds of CC and 6 rounds of draft across 2 days to secure 2 spots in the top 8.
And seeing Chane back in the top 8 may surprise some, but I honestly think it's still a very, very strong deck, and I think that is definitely proven by the performance here.
Piloting these Chane decks were Michael Fang and Cody Williams, who had the odds stacked against them in a sea of 5 Briars and 1 Lexi. Across top 8, Michael Fang was able to battle his way through to the finals, where he faced Tarek Patel on Briar.
Here. This could be the game. Is that a yellow? Is that a 0 cost from Arsenal? It is, and there is the Rune Chant token. Both players on 1 live. Skullcap is not live. We see the fist pump, and there's your national champion, Tarek Patel.
What an amazing run. What an amazing game.
Despite coming so close to victory, Chane's loyal servants at this event showed that he was still a force to be reckoned with, and had been overlooked by the community at large after the Seeds of Agony ban.
Alright, so this chain list, give full credits to the Hyperloops. So it's a community ran by Joe Colon and Cody.
I think Chane is the best aggro deck in the game, by far, especially with all the new tech.
They made this deck, it's really good. I didn't know what I was going to play until I just goldfished some hands. There's this one hand I did like 32 damage out of nowhere, and I was like, I'm sold.
I think everyone slept on it, they thought it was dead. Right. And that's just insane to me. I don't block, I push out more damage than the Briars do, so it seems to be working.
Without seeds, I felt like a little puppy, and then just being able to play that deck just kind of gave me that confidence again, so full credits to them.
With the right pilot and a finely tuned deck, he could still compete at the highest level. Chane did finish the national championship season with 1 win at the 84-player Hong Kong Regional Championship piloted by Air Bun. Chane only represented 10% of decks at this event, second to an overwhelming representation of Briar. Still, Chane managed to secure 3 spots in the top 8 and the win, earning him 40 more Living Legend points.
It still wouldn't work because he would make the rune
Oh my god, he concedes. Oh my goodness, an Art of War. And with that, Bun is the Hong Kong Flesh and Blood National Champions. Congratulations to Bun.
With the national season over, he was still at the top of the Living Legend leaderboard at 442 points, but other heroes were starting to catch up. Chane players continued adjusting their decks, now including more generic cards like Belittle, Minnowism, Captain's Call, and more potions. Yellow and blue Riftbinds were also notably absent from these decks, as the power couldn't consistently be increased enough without Seeds of Agony. With far fewer blood deck cards to play from the banish zone, players had to meticulously pitch stack their decks to banish the correct cards in the late game. Chane's game plan remained the same, it just took a skilled pilot to pull it off now. In the wake of another metagame dominated by a single hero, the January 12th banned and suspended announcement significantly nerfed Briar, but also affected all aggressive decks with the banning of Plunder Run, one of the most powerful non-attack actions ever printed. Chane decks were running at least 6 copies of the card, so this was another tough break for those trying to keep Chane relevant. Luckily, Everfest, the next supplemental set, released on February 4th, 2022, which gave Chane some powerful new Runeblade cards like Runic Reclamation, Swarming Gloomveil, and Blue Shrill of Skullform. But Everfest is better remembered for introducing more Spectra cards for Prism and the new hero, Bravo, Star of the Show. Once again, a round of bans and new cards set the stage for a new metagame for upcoming Premier play. Where Chane would land in this new metagame was uncertain. The first in-store ProQuest series ran from February 9th to March 13th, 2022, with over 250 events held around the world, and rewarded winners with an invite to Flesh and Blood's first ever Pro Tour later that spring. In the weeks leading up to the ProQuest season, whispers of Bravo, Star of the Show's power started to circulate.
I played Bravo, Star of the Show. I think the new Bravo is just really, really strong. You know, you hit the fusion, you just do a ton of damage, and it feels like it has a lot of great matchups across the board.
And come the first week of events, it was clear there was a new boogeyman in town. Without a doubt, Bravo was the star of the show, representing 22% of the meta and saw win rates like never before. Prism and Viserai were the second and third most represented decks and created something of a triangle meta together with Starvo. Chane was the definition of a sleeper pick in this meta. While only representing 6% of decks, those that did play Chane had a good top 8 and win conversion rate that increased throughout the 4 weeks. Across the ProQuest season, Chane won 19 events, adding 114 points to his Living Legend total, putting him at 556. Though, as you can see, he was no longer at the top of the leaderboard. Those that secured their qualification for the first Pro Tour set their sights on New Jersey for the weekend of May 13th through 15th. Flesh and Blood's first ever Pro Tour was hyped to be an event not to miss. After all, this was the game's first professional tier event.
The Pro Tour is a very important part of our overall plan. It is that aspirational pathway. We do want to create heroes within the Flesh and Blood community and have something for people to really aspire to. Do not miss Pro Tour number 1. Like, if there's an event not to miss, it's that one. We're really going to make it a tremendous event for everyone. It's not just about the players at the Pro Tour, it's about all the fans.
Though shortly before the Pro Tour, the May 2nd scheduled banned and suspended update was announced early on April 25th to balance the meta and give enough time for Pro Tour competitors to adjust. Luckily for Chane, this announcement saw Starvo and Viserai knock down a peg. On May 13th, 2022, 375 players from over 24 countries competed for their chance to be crowned as Flesh and Blood's first ever Pro Tour champion. And as a result of the recent bans, Chane saw a boost in popularity for the Pro Tour, representing 21.4% of the decks registered. After 7 rounds of Classic Constructed on day 1, 174 players remained, with Chane holding strong. At 20.7% of the meta, 36 players. After 7 more rounds on day 2, top 8 was determined.
Sounds like we are ready to take a peek at our standings, and this will reveal our top 8 for the first ever Flesh and Blood Pro Tour.
Making the cut as the only Chane player was Pablo Pintor from Spain. He had had quite the Cinderella story to make it into top 8. He started out his Pro Tour run losing his first 2 matches.
Starting off the entire tournament with 2 losses, that could be so mentally deflating, but then pulling things together and just rattling off win after win.
Yeah, when you start off 0-2 and you're thinking, oh, not like this. I traveled halfway across the world to play in this tournament.
You have to have some mental fortitude to pull that off. That speaks to him as a player.
I had a pretty rough start of the tournament. I lost my first 2 rounds. I had to win almost every other game. time playing in the top 8 in the Pro Tour. I'm so happy that I was able to make the cut.
He's our Chane player in this top 8 of this Pro Tour. Now you're going up against Prism this round. How are you feeling about your match?
I could say it's a good matchup for me. This is a top 8 at the most professional tournament ever of FaB, and yeah, I'm pretty scared.
His quarterfinal match against William Kubrick on Prism was a favorable matchup, and he was able to win the match with a comfortable life lead.
I've got to believe that Pablo can see the end in sight here. He's got to have enough from this point with multiple other Texas. Looks like Rosetta Thorn for 2-2.
And there's the 4 damage from Ghostly Visit to close out the game, and Chane just putting on an absolute masterclass of removing the board and pushing extra damage.
In the semifinals, he was against Isaac Kroot, a player with a long history of tournament success, piloting Bravo, star of the show. After 7 Soul Shackles and no cards left in deck, Pablo delivered the final arcane damage to advance him to the finals.
I think this is a done deal. Like, this is it. Rosetta Thorn moves forward, 2 arcane damage, headed the way of Isaac Kroot, and Pablo Pintor punches his ticket to that coveted final spot here at the first ever Flesh and Blood Pro Tour.
Waiting for him was fellow European Florian Christian Logan, also playing Starvo.
They can't both hold up. One of these players has to fall in this final. And gonna start things off here in what looks like the best way possible. We're gonna reveal 3 elements, but Pablo's card's not lining up exactly how he wants, and it's just fine, committing to defense here. There's that tome, so perfectly timed again from Pablo. Fairly confident I saw all 3 elements, so now we're gonna see if we're gonna go ahead and commit some defensive resources here.
So this looks like a block for 6. Speaking of Soul Shackles, number 7 getting activated here. Gonna give this Ghostly Visit go again. So this is the first attack of the turn. That's first step towards either winning this turn or pushing it to possibly winning the next turn.
Yeah, but good blocks at the ready for Pablo, and now Pablo is gonna come back with 2 cards in hand, 7 cards being banished from that Soul Shackle, and Art of War at the ready.
In nail-biting fashion, Pablo's own blood debt brought himself to 1 life, leaving 1 final turn to either push through lethal damage or succumb to his own blood debt.
Any more? The last
card, another bounty demigod. That's key.
This is probably going to be enough. Do we have enough resources to attack enough times here? You can see the end in sight. This is the last turn of the Pro Tour. Either Pablo wins here or he dies to his own blood debt.
2 cards in hand, 2 instances of go again. Chane, I think this is it. I think there's 3 attacks lined up from Pablo with everything available here, and that will spell doom for Florence Pro Tour 1.
This is lethal through. Oh, this is going to be. I think this is going to be too much. It does look like that's going to be it.
Does it?
Pablo Pintor is your first Flesh and Blood Pro Tour champion. Chane has risen to the mountaintop. It has climbed all the way to the peak, and Pablo Pintor is your champion, the first one ever in Flesh and Blood. Chane finally brings home that big trophy.
What a Pro Tour final, Chane, and that came down to the last second.
Wow.
Pablo had done it. He became the first Pro Tour champion, earning Chane 200 Living Legend points, putting him at 756 points on the leaderboard. Without skipping a beat, Premier Play continued into ProQuest 2 season from May 14th to June 5th, with 323 events across 38 different countries, and rewarded winners with an invite to Flesh and Blood's second Pro Tour later that fall in Lille, France. However, with his recent success, it was clear that Chane's time in Classic Constructed was coming to a close. At 756 points and well positioned in an established meta, all it would take was a solid showing from Chane throughout ProQuest 2 season, and he would surely hit 1,000 points. In the first week, Chane won 13 events. In the second week, he won 26 events. And in the third week, he won 19 events. With 1 more week of ProQuests left, Chane was sitting at 988 Living Legend points. Just 3 wins in the final week would cross him over the threshold into Living Legend. With another solid performance, winning 20 events in Week 4, Chane crossed 1,000 Living Legend points. He was officially scheduled to no longer be playable in Classic Constructed come the release of the next set, Uprising. Shortly before his scheduled exit from the format, Chane's last ever Classic Constructed victory came at the 81-person battle-hardened Madrid, piloted by Alvaro Francisco Toledano Benito, pushing him an additional 10 points into Living Legend status. Chane officially left Classic Constructed on June 24th, 2022, and he had quite the journey to achieve such an honor. His debut all those years ago was the most commanding takeover of a metagame Flesh and Blood had ever seen at the time. No hero had pushed the limits of the game further than Chane when he first entered the format, but even after continued bans and new heroes pushing Chane out of relevance, he lurked in the shadows while his most devoted disciples continued to prove he was not to be forgotten. When the time was right, Chane struck victory at the first ever professional tier event, in what will go down as one of the greatest tournament runs in the game's history. But his return to the spotlight was short-lived. As quickly as he came back to prominence, his time came to an end. Perhaps we'll see Chane bound by shadow again someday. For now, Chane exists in a world beyond our reach, the world of living legends. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I just want to give a huge shout out to every content creator, caster, deck builder, the competitors here on the Roll of Honor, and anyone else that had a hand in making Chane living legend. I want to give a huge thank you to Alex from Tales of Rathe, who was kind enough to let me use his footage from ProTour New Jersey. If you haven't seen those videos, I'll link them in the description below. Definitely check those out if you haven't seen them. Thanks again for watching, and best of luck to everyone competing in Las Vegas this weekend.